Buenas tardes. Y vamos a dar inicio a...
Good afternoon. We'd like to kick off the press conference after the ECOFIN meeting and the meeting of CELAC and the EU. The Deputy Prime Minister will take the floor, after that Commissioner Dombrovskis, and after that Camillo Gonsalves, Deputy President of CELAC and CAF, and respectively will take the floor, and the IDB. Thank you. Good afternoon again. Thank you for joining us for this briefing. This meeting has been really a historic one. I can say that with confidence. For the first time, the economic and finance ministers of our respective regions have met together in the high-level informal meeting under the Spanish presidency, the ECOFIN ministers meeting. And we also had people representing multilateral agencies active in the world and in CELAC area. A number of things have been highlighted. First of all, a great deal of alignment in our agendas on three aspects: green, digital, and human development and inequality reduction paths. We share common views, and that is in a long-term context. The agenda is not just for these countries, but also for the MDBs, the biggest MDBs and multilateral bodies around the world. This doesn't always happen, hasn't always happened, and it's very important for work going forward. Another important aspect was consensus that seems to be general around this table about the fact that we can make progress together on our shared agenda to boost multilateralism, to strengthen a global framework based on peace, on mutual respect and dialogue, on sustainable growth, and that this will be the basis for a better world. Today's meeting has been historic and unprecedented, as I said. There were 60 countries from both sides of the Atlantic represented, representing 14% of the population and 21% of the world's GDP, plus the financial institutions, like I already said, and the multilateral bodies, which shows that our voice together, as Latin America, Caribbean, and the EU, is a strong voice and can weigh on international discussions which are ongoing in other fora. We exchanged views on a number of areas. It was an intense, substantive debate, very rich debate, and it shows the value of coordination between financial institutions, between our policy work, our desire to strengthen the MDB's new governance and instruments for better instruments for investment, development, and public-private partnership for both the poorest countries, but also for middle-income countries. This is another tangible step forward to create a real agenda developing green, digital, and social investments in the real world, so that the Global Gateway initiative of the EU can be taken forward. Global Gateway means 45 billion euros of invention to answer the challenges and strategic challenges we face. Digitalization, food safety and security, biodiversity protection, green growth, protecting the Amazon, which we repeated as an important topic several times over the course of the day. We also talked about sustainable mobility and about how to deal with concrete things like the sargassum problem in the Caribbean waters. And we talked about concrete projects in a very nitty-gritty way, determinedly showing that we want to tackle them and make sure that we have the governance system so that such projects can become realities and have a real impact on economic growth, fair growth, and inclusive growth in the region of CELAC. The second point we discussed this afternoon was how the global financial safety net can be boosted. Again, we had a wide-ranging exchange of views on different aspects pertaining thereto. And with the G20 have discussed, which we are also going to be talking about over the next week or so at the UN in Unger, or at the World Bank IMF meeting a bit later, and at COP28 in November. So these are issues being discussed in a wide range of fora. We're talking about how the MDBs and the IMF mechanisms can be improved to ensure that there's enough resource made available for sustainable growth and to combat climate change and build resilience, social resilience as well as environmental resilience for our economies. This covers a number of sub-issues, but there's two key ideas I would use to summarize that, and they really ran through everything we've been doing today and saying today. Today, more than ever, Latin America and the Caribbean are a strategic partner for the EU. They are partners, have a key role to play in designing this new world order, an order based on multilateralism, on democratic values, on social development and sustainable growth. The agendas we identified together, which the Spanish government and the EU in general have been pushing for a while. And secondly, and as Sergio referred to, if I can steal his thunder, and we were at the Cathedral of Santiago, a beautiful building we visited yesterday, and it was an image he used. He said, you build cathedrals starting from the bottom, and this meeting is the first such stone we're laying to build this cathedral of sustainable growth to which we all aspire. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Let me start by thanking the Spanish presidency for hosting this meeting and welcoming us to the beautiful city of Santiago. At the EU-CELAC summit in July, we agreed to pursue a dynamic new agenda delivering win-win outcomes for both our regions. In particular, we share ambition to make our economies greener and more digital. This is essential for future-proofing our economies, for boosting our resilience in an increasingly unstable geopolitical situation. Building on the successful summit, our discussions today focused on two concrete solutions. First, the rollout of the EU Latin America Caribbean Global Gateway Investment Agenda of 45 billion euros. This will boost sustainable economic growth, support fair, green and digital transition, and tackle inequalities in Latin America and the Caribbean. Second, the reform of global financial architecture. Next week, we'll meet at the SDG summit, and it's clear that we have to revamp our financial architecture to put sustainable development goals back on track. The EU has been actively engaged in the reform of multilateral development bank process. At the annual meeting of IMF and World Bank in October, we should work together to move this agenda forward. Trade also has a key role to play, underpinned by strong, modern and mutually beneficial agreements. These deals can help our exporting companies, including SMEs, to develop, internationalize and grow. Dedicated sustainability chapters and cooperation on digital and data issues will help drive our twin transitions forward. So let me provide a brief state of play. The July summit injected new political dynamism towards conclusion of the EU-Mercosur agreement. Presidents von der Leyen and Lula da Silva declared that they were ready to conclude by the end of the year. We had a constructive virtual meeting of chief negotiators yesterday, and we also received the response from Mercosur as regards our proposal for sustainability instrument. This agreement is of major economic and geostrategic importance, and all partners now should make all efforts to get a deal done. The EU-Chile agreement is on track for signature before the end of the year. The modern and progressive deal will support shared interests and values, including strong sustainability dimension. And we want to make decisive progress towards modernizing the EU-Mexico agreement. These agreements are primed to take our relations to the next level. This is why we are keen to invest political energy in making decisive progress in coming weeks and months. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to begin, first of all, by thanking very much our first Vice President and the entire government of Spain for the tremendous hospitality that they have provided to all of the members of CELAC, and for investing as much political capital as has been invested in ensuring that this meeting is not only well conducted, but well convened, and that there were other important partners in the meeting that we had, and to thank CAF as well for their tremendous convening power and for their role in facilitating this meeting. Whenever countries have challenges, as we have all had with COVID and with inflation and with war, they have one or two decisions. One is to look inwards and become more insular, and one is to look out and forge partnerships with friendly nations that have common cause. And the countries of CELAC under the presidency of Saint Vincent and the Grenadines decided that one of the ways that we would face the global challenges was to look outwards and to forge partnerships with like-minded regions, states, and communities to confront these global challenges together. And that is why, it's one of the reasons why, for the first time in 8 years, last July, CELAC and the European Union had meetings at the highest level to discuss these shared problems and shared approaches to these problems. And that is partially one of the reasons why we are here for the first time as ministers of finance of both CELAC and the European Union to have further discussions on the matters that were discussed by the heads of state and government last July. And if you look at the outcome document from July, you may see one or two sentences about a global investment partnership and one or two sentences about reform of the international financial architecture. And we took those one or two sentences and we put flesh on the bones. And we spent the better part of today discussing in great detail how we see, as regions and as individual countries, how we see these challenges and how we see we can forge a common approach to them. In terms of investment, with the assistance of CAF, we have forged and compiled an impressive list of investments in Latin America and the Caribbean that have real benefit for real human beings, that are people-centered and assist economies and communities in myriad ways, from digital transformation to climate change, to sustainable fisheries, to health and sanitation. And we advanced that process considerably today in our discussions and discussed ways in which those investments can be accelerated and better facilitated. And in terms of reform of the global financial architecture, I think there is consensus that the architecture as constructed 50 years ago is not fit for purpose today, but that we can all work together in various ways to ensure that the resources of the global community can be better put to address some of the challenges that we face today. Climate challenges, challenges of inflation, challenges of development, and challenges related to debt. And I think that we have made important progress in finding common ground in all of these areas. And that's important because this meeting is a staging post between the meeting that took place in July, the World Bank, IMF meetings, the UN meetings, UN General Assembly meetings, and of course COP28. And all of those meetings come back to back. And what we have done is emerge from this meeting as two regions more closely connected, with a better understanding of each other's possibilities and limitations, and a stronger will to confront these challenges together. I think there's tremendous optimism in the room. And I think it's the first time, certainly in my personal experience, that countries of the global north and the global south have met together in such a cooperative manner and found such consensus on such diverse issues. And I think that we are better equipped leading into those meetings to confront challenges related to climate change, related to the digital transformation, related to inflation, related to health and sanitation and the sharing of technologies, and related to making sure that all countries have an equitable say in rulemaking and in a more equitable global financial architecture. Those are tremendous advancements, and I want to thank the First Vice President for her excellent hosting of the meeting, for keeping us focused, keeping us on task, and for really coming forward with the sort of meeting that adds optimism to the shared fight that we have against all of these challenges. And I thank you very much.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon from me too. I'd also like to start by thanking Nadia Calviño, Deputy Prime Minister, for hosting us here. The President of CAF, my friend Sergio, thank you as well for your efforts in preparing and laying the groundwork for this, because you jointly helped us to organize this, and also Valdis Dombrovskis. Thank you for helping us be here to underscore our strategic partnership between our regions at a moment which could be a tipping point for demonstrating political will on both sides of the Atlantic, which we must seize as an opportunity. The MDBs, the CAF, the IDB, the development banks can be the implementing arm of our political will at this moment of decisiveness. As we look at the agendas we share and the agendas the banks share and the MDB share, which overlap so much, we can take things to another level from the IDB point of view. When we look at the projects we have in our portfolio and how many of those fit into Global Gateway, I think there's like 220 in the pipeline that directly flow in, and we talk about $15 billion worth. And thanks to that, Latin America and the Caribbean can be part of a solution for many global challenges and have an important role to play in the future. For that to be a reality, we need cooperation between ourselves, between us and Europe, and between CAF, the IDB, between us and the World Bank, IDB and the World Bank, and the BIS. We've made announcements about some of those since we've been here. We've talked about a coalition to defend the Amazon. We've also taken that forward, and as Amazon countries, working with EU countries, that's a concrete deliverable we've been able to set. The first of many, I hope, first step of many steps we will take together as we drive our road forward. Thank you.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. It's a real honor for me, too, to be here representing the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. At the end of the day, which, as you said, goes back to a year ago when we first discussed this. It was the 20 years of Spain joining CAF, where we were celebrating, and we first floated the idea of this meeting together, as the Deputy Prime Minister said. And this was a very important moment, and also when Spain joined, and that discussion we had last year commemorating that was all about building long-term joint shared projects. Not always easy, but important given the great challenges this generation faces. The environment does not have borders. Oceans do not have borders. It's a joint space we share. We have to coordinate in order to meet the challenges that means. And the President pro tempore of Saint Vincent and Grenadines, my dear colleague, and my friends here on the rostrum with us, have all played a key role in taking us to where we stand today, building a method, a way of working together through which we can be effective in rollout. And as Mr. Gonsalves said today, I say it's about putting flesh on the structures of leaders' declarations. Declaration statements are fine. They have a horizon, but they have to be able to have impact, measure impact, monitor impact, and roll out in the medium and longer term. And this means coordination, means dialogue. We're talking about a 2-year process every 2 years to measure progress at the highest level. But we're also talking about billions of euros have to be mobilized. We hope to be rolled out by 2027, 170 projects in the pipeline, 33 countries in Latin America and Caribbean to benefit from them with the right social and environmental standards. This has to be rolled out to the end so that with the banks, with the institutions, we achieve our aims. We know it won't be easy. The team knows it'll be a tough job of coordinating and monitoring, but we intend to do that. It's our task, and we are prepared to shoulder it. We came here, we've been preparing this discussion on Global Gateway for a while. Well, we've been talking, as Minister Gonsalves said, with Deputy Prime Minister Calviño and her team, and the teams to which I paid tribute because they did a lot over the last year, as a process of talking about the global financial infrastructure and architecture so that it's fit for purpose in these difficult times we live in. We have many, many banks across the world that provide about 12% of world financing through our respective development banks. They are coordinating more and more. In Catalonia, in the Latin American summit we were able to measure progress, but it wasn't enough. But as we were saying earlier, a crisis is going up fast on a lift, and we're struggling behind to take the stairs. And it's getting pretty hard to catch up. And we don't want to run out of puff. We have too many agendas to follow. Are they in contradiction? Green transition, digital transition. You can't do it all at the same time if you have to choose one against the other. You have to put them all together and raise them all together. You can't carry one without also carrying the other. You can't protect the Amazon without having the right digital tools. You can't protect the Amazon without looking after the people who live there. We're talking about 50 million people in many countries. They have to live there, but it's also the lungs of the world. But you have to also protect the Andes, the other forests in Central America, the Pantanal, and all these other areas. And in the Caribbean, our islands and our seas, where 10% of the world's carbon is held and sequestered, which we have to also protect. And our projects have to address that. And they do. But as Deputy Prime Minister Calviño and others have said today, we share this commitment to ensure also that this will be an ongoing process. You have the presidency now, but it has to go on beyond that. And it's going to be, I think, the 5th such presidency of Spain. Well, there'll be even more after, more to come, and other presidencies to come. I'm pretty sure on our side as well, we have repeated presidencies on CELAC side, and we're not going to take our eye off the ball. We're going to take this forward, and our teams have worked tirelessly for weeks and years and months, and I know more of that. I think 1,600 people here today altogether for this summit, which is saying a lot. Not easy to bring so many people together. I said before, we're going to go from Santiago de Chile to Santiago de Compostela and then back to Santiago de Chile with our pilgrim's baton to take ourselves forward to where we want to go. Not easy, but it's meant to be a difficult walk. But we're going to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. Thank you very much. Now we'll take questions. Please say who you are and whom you represent.
Buenas tardes, Laura Pérez de la...
Laura Pérez from Agencia EFE. My question is about the agreement of free trade and Mercosur that's been mooted. Are we did we talk about it today? What's the state of play? Has there been any follow-up to the response from what was said yesterday with the European Commission? Are you more optimistic about taking this forward before the end of the year to a satisfactory conclusion? And to Vice President Dombrovskis, could you say what your initial reaction is to what Mercosur said and what the next steps might be? Deputy Prime Minister first. With your permission, I'll say a couple of things briefly, and then Mr. Dombrovskis will be more specific. But yes, we did talk about it in the meeting today, about the need to build greater trade ties and to get a satisfactory conclusion as soon as possible with Mercosur. And certainly on the Spanish side, I can say we're fully committed to these negotiations. We think they're a win-win for us and for our Latin American Caribbean colleagues. We'll do everything we can as presidency to boost these negotiations to a rapid, successful outcome, if possible, under our presidency.
Well, yeah, just to complement some of the points to which Nadia already said. Well, first of all, indeed, we touched upon the EU-Mercosur agreement and the state of play of also other agreements with Latin American countries and how we are making progress. And indeed, there is a willingness to engage from both sides and make progress on the EU-Mercosur agreement. And indeed, it's economically and geopolitically important. In terms of the economic value, it's actually largest agreement which EU has ever negotiated. As we know, there had been concerns on the EU side regarding the environmental questions and notably deforestation. So that's why we have proposed already in late February, early March, additional sustainability instrument to EU-Mercosur agreement, and just yesterday we received the Mercosur's reply, and also there had been discussions at the chief negotiators level. It will take us a couple of days to do the assessment and to provide the reactions, but as I have been saying, there is a willingness to engage very intensively and to make progress and hopefully indeed to conclude by the end of the year.
Hola, Belén Carreño de la agencia Reuters.
From Reuters. First question for Commissioner Dombrovskis, VP Dombrovskis, on the Ukraine grain deal and what you expect from the EU point of view. The Polish Prime Minister said today that they're not going to fall in line and they have a unilateral ban prolonged. What can the Commission do? How can you avoid this situation? What measures are possible? And for Deputy Prime Minister Calviño and for any of the other speakers, should they choose to answer, on the global gateway and what you discussed today, can you give us some more details? You've mentioned the Amazon, but have you got any numbers? 45 billion total, how much, for instance, would be going to the Amazon, or any other concrete examples? And of the 2027 rollout date, it's a big challenge. Of course, the EU's Recovery and Resilience Plan was a tough challenge to roll out as well. But looking at the region and project rollout, what's the timeline in concrete terms you think for Global Gateway to actually start pumping funds in your view?
On the first question, obviously it was not on today's agenda, but that was something we were dealing in parallel with today's agenda. Indeed, so basically what is now agreed from the Ukrainian side that they are ready to introduce measures to avoid surge of imports in the EU member states, both setting up short-term, so to say, quick fix measures right now, and working on some longer-term measures, for example, export licensing system within 30 days time. So, as regards the ban on the Ukrainian foodstuffs in 5 member states, we currently do not see distortion of the market in those 5 member states. So, therefore, we are not extending the ban, because it's worth noting that it's exceptional safeguard. It's not something which should be there for unlimited periods of time and for in situations which are not situations of market disturbances or distortions. At the same time, to avoid those market distortions, those export control measures would be taken from the Ukrainian side. So that's a basic point which is there. Also, if you look at the situation in general in terms of Ukrainian foodstuff exports, so we had been working these months very intensively through our coordination platform with Ukraine, with 5 member states, to increase the capacity of solidarity lanes, addressing logistical bottlenecks, grain storages, and so on and so forth. And basically, the capacity of solidarity lanes is reaching the required capacity to allow for Ukrainian foodstuff exports to developing countries, even in absence of a Black Sea corridor. So lots of work has been actually done in the last couple of months, and also from that point of view, we would not expect coming back to a dramatic situation like it was half a year ago, when indeed there were major distortions, but also because of logistical bottlenecks, because it was just not possible to get this grain to the countries which needed it. So now this issue is to a large extent addressed. So there is going to be those measures from Ukrainian side, and obviously we'll also continue to monitor the situation from European Commission side, and should there be market distortion, should there be a justified need for emergency safeguard, it still remains an option. So, so really what's important right now is that all countries work in a spirit of compromise, engage constructively, and that we are finding this solution. And clearly, the best, of course, would be that member states would refrain from unilateral measures and work along the lines of this agreement.
Sí, sobre la segunda
On the second question, and I think Ilan will have more details to give you about the Amazon project, but what I would say that the projects on the list as part of Global Gateway, and 9 emblematic ones are specifically identified today, are all at different degrees of maturity, from the Line 2 of the Bogota Metro or the Green Hydrogen Chile project. They are pretty advanced far down the line, and private investment is interested. Others are further back and need more preparatory work. Now, the European Commission can probably share more details with you in a more concrete way. There's more detailed information available on individual projects if you want to sort of go to any particularly concrete point, but perhaps Ilan can add a wee bit more. Well, on Amazon-related issues, as part of the Global Gateway-related projects, the questions of Mike is about how much of the funding from Global Gateway might go to the Amazon. But as the Deputy Prime Minister says, the thing is, the details you'll probably get if you ask specific questions from the Commission or from our teams on individual projects. But my colleague will say a wee bit more now. Yes, those of us who are concerned with the Amazon see things through the various initiatives that already exist in our platform. We then have to top up and total up the different amounts and different project resources, project. Some of those will be part of the gateway funding. But we're still looking at the details of what fits where. It'll probably take a few months before the details can be properly fleshed out and see which bits of what we're doing or planning is consistent with Global Gateway.
Buenas tardes, Bernardo.
Good afternoon. From El Tiempo, Bogota, Colombia. Beyond the initiatives that have been referred to as part of Global Gateway, I'd rather want to focus on and ask Commissioner Dombrovskis about, and also Mr. Díaz-Granados, what the position is on our President Gustavo Petro's proposal that there be a massive emission of SDR, special drawing rights, more than for the pandemic, and specially targeted for the climate crisis mitigation work. So that's a concrete proposal. What's the EU's view of that, Commissioner? And as a follow-up, what about debt relief and the debt for environment swap? How much of a priority, if at all, is it for you, the EU, and obviously the other speakers as well?
Indeed, this question of reform of global financial architecture was in today's discussions, and we know that there are concrete initiatives which are currently already being discussed or being implemented, both as regards the IMF trusts, both as regards as debt relief initiatives and debt servicing relief initiatives which are currently being implemented. And from the EU side, we are open to discuss what are the further ways, how to make sure that indeed our multilateral financial institutions, international financial institutions are up to the task as regards implementation of sustainable development goals and ensuring both green and digital transition. So we're open to discuss proposals from different countries and jointly find the best way forward.
Sí, bueno, diría lo siguiente.
Well, what I would say is going back to a week ago when I was in Cartagena for the financing meeting, and a proposal was reiterated by your president, as had been reiterated in Brussels earlier, about SDRs, and the Global South generally has a strong proposal for that. It's been useful during the pandemic, and the thing is, they have complex rules, these SDRs, and you have to see what can be done. But it's not easy. It's an ongoing discussion. I think it's only at an embryonic state. With the relevant banks, you have to be authorized by the World Bank, and we are one of those MDBs, CAF. We operate in the Caribbean and Latin America. There are others across the world. We've already done operations of that sort for a country in the region that has interest in using this. We think it is possible. There's a way forward, and to deal with the issues in the region, but we've got a situation where crises are financial crises due to not man-made mistakes, but because of climate change. And public policy design is only part of the question in such a situation. And CELAC and Saint Vincent and Grenadines have all got examples of this. We've lived through extreme climate events, which can easily knock huge chunks of your GDP out. several GDP points off your economy. And this is going to be future. And then one thing drives another. Climate change drives migration, drives other factors. These discussions, therefore, are very important. And you have this sort of two-track global gateway discussion we had here today in Santiago de Compostela. This is something we can do with what we've already got, but more long-term, new reflection, a new paradigm, new global architecture, which might be possible, is possibly easy, but takes a long time, and that we've only just started that, and we have to see where that takes us. But quite certain we need more resources in different ways for adaptation. Clearly, all our development banks together, currently, all together, would not have enough to face those challenges. And just to answer your question, if I can add something very quickly, today's meeting, we talked about a lot of options and concrete proposals. You mentioned one. We also talk about capital injections, about funding arrangement, debt and climate mitigation swaps, and a lot of other things that I think will be very important for the annual meetings we're going to have in October for the World Bank and the IMF. Spain had promised to redirect 20% of ISDRs in that direction. We've done that, and we also made significant contribution, which we think can really help Latin America and the Caribbean in a concrete way. The most vulnerable countries as well as the middle-income countries. I think Spain has played one of the leading roles in actually putting our money where our mouth is. We were one of the first contributors to the new IMF Sustainability and Resilience Fund, and we've obviously within our own budgetary capacity to continue to show determination and engagement in playing our part globally, including yesterday when we signed a 302 million euro contribution to the new capital raising for CAF, which will help this particular development bank to boost its capacity in supporting the countries of that institution. And I think it's worth highlighting these things. We talk about promises, but today we are talking about reality. Yesterday we signed a reality. Spain is delivering, is doing what it promised to do. We're acting now.
That I think that SDRs do play a very important part of the toolkit that will be necessary to address some of the global challenges that we're facing. And there's an increased consensus in countries of Latin America and the Caribbean that SDRs must play a more efficient role in addressing these challenges. In addition to the President's suggestion in the Caribbean, Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados has introduced the Bridgetown Initiative, which also calls for SDR allocations and for discussions of quotas and how they can be better applied to deal with the challenges. Those were all discussed today. Additionally, the issue of debt for climate swaps was very fulsomely discussed. And some very useful examples were provided by countries like Barbados in the Caribbean, and Portugal talked about what they're doing in Cape Verde for similar activities where these countries that are heavily indebted, and let's face it, the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean are heavily indebted, but a lot of that debt is not a result of profligacy or mismanagement. It's a result of exogenous factors like climate change, like countries that have to rebuild roads and rebuild bridges after multiple disasters and have to borrow to do these things. And the idea of using some of those debt payments to address resilience and adaptation was very fulsomely discussed today. And I think there's definitely growing consensus that both SDRs and new mechanisms for managing debt, like debt for climate swaps, are an important part of the toolkit that we have.
We have time for one final question. El País, Uruguay.
Gracias.
Thank you. From the El País from Uruguay. Actually, two questions. The first for Deputy Prime Minister Calviño and for Commissioner Dombrovskis. Though perhaps the other speakers may wish to answer too. But anyway, back to Global Gateway. 45 billion euros, I think, has been mentioned for going to Latin American countries. We've identified projects together with the local stakeholders, including CAF and so forth. But in concrete terms, what are we thinking about in financial instruments to mobilize these resources? That's the first thing. Secondly, on this agenda, there's very much the green agenda part of it. But in Latin America, that's tied in with human development and social development. Many of our countries in the region depend on hydrocarbons, at least in large part. A lot of our emissions from Latin American Caribbean come from farming and other aspects which, if they have to mitigate those effects, would obviously suffer. So is there some sort of mechanism to improve, for instance, access for our goods to your markets in return for certain types of behavioral changes? Well, I'll let VP Dombrovskis talk about concrete aspects if he chooses to go into greater detail about what the Commission's doing in some of those areas. But as to the financial instruments, well, it depends on the projects. It could be credit, it could be guarantees. It depends on a case-by-case basis. What we've got is a governance mechanism and a coordination mechanism so that all the resources from all the multilateral and EU bodies and institutions can be focused together on rolling out projects in a timely manner because they've been identified as strategic, which we identified through our dialogue with us, our partners next to me here, and indeed the individual countries in the process, which is a very special process, not replicated elsewhere. As Minister Gonsalves just said, it means we can put flesh on the bones. It enables us to take the mandate we were given to by our heads of state and government back in July in Brussels to create priority projects and a joint agenda and then roll out. Oh, now that was 2 months ago when we got the mandate. Now we've got the follow-up and the governance mechanism. We have a list of projects. So we've done that. And now we have that strong determination to move this forward and improve our cooperation on both sides of the Atlantic for sustainable and just growth, and to ensure that the model we share, the geopolitical model for a world order that shares our shared values, is a reality. And if I can just chip in, on the instruments, there are a number of them. Others have been used before. We've discussed one already, the Barbados proposal. Ecuador, Latin America have also already had such swaps, for instance, the ones we talked about. We talked about the swap, which made it possible for Ecuador to mobilize ways of protecting the Galapagos better. Sustainable development, green bonds, other types of financial instruments that have been innovative. They're not pie in the sky. They're already being used. They can be used more and better, but they already exist in the Global Gateway inter alia.
Yeah, maybe to add some points. I think many things had already been said. So what kind of financial instruments can be used to mobilize 45 billion euros under the EU-CELAC Global Gateway Investment Agenda. There obviously we'll need both public and private funding, and we are looking how to replicate approach which we are successfully using in the EU, which is to unlock substantial amounts of private investment with the help of public investment or public support by providing some guarantees, first lost absorption capacity, so basically providing certain de-risking of private investment. And we have a program of Invest EU within the European Union where we are successfully using this approach, and we are seeing that it helps to drive investment, so we think it's a good approach also to use in a context of Global Gateway initiative. And on a second question on access to markets, well, first of all, it's worth noting that all our modern free trade agreements, so EU free trade agreements, have ambitious sustainable development chapters, because expectation clearly is from EU member states, from citizens in the EU, that trade is not leading to negative environmental or social labor rights outcomes, that actually trade needs to have a positive contribution also to those sustainability, environmental, labor rights aspects. Therefore, in a sense, having this ambitious sustainability provisions is integral part of our trade agenda.
Just one addition, following up on what the IDB said. For Global Gateway, we're going to try to combine all the available panoply of mechanisms that we have. Some may be easier to roll out than others, but we intend to use everything. We have operational programs and operational schemes in our bank, and as Vice Prime Minister Albino said, we're going to leverage everything we can to use all sources of finance that are potentially available. Thanks to the extra effort, for instance, that the agreement we signed with the Spanish government, we've been able to double our potential in my bank. In the run-up to 2030, we think that as the needs for Global Gateway funds are higher and higher, we'll have higher and higher resources to meet those needs. The other aspect, of course, is guarantees to mobilize funds, to leverage, to crowd in private funds. We can use them. We can use our balance sheets to do that. We can do more, and we will over the next few years. And we had the peer assessment from the EU, which makes it possible for CAF to work more closely with the EU, for which we thank them. It again helps us in rolling out these guarantees, which shows that it's all part of a shared dream, a shared target, mobilizing funds. Every euro you put in a development bank is multiplied 7 or 10-fold in development finance, and that's important. Another important thing is coordination. Ilan also mentioned this. We're all very enthusiastic, as you can see, about this, and as also Deputy Prime Minister said, and I remember in November in Madrid, something you said then, that the banks have to be a system and act as a system and bring systemic results. And that's something we very much switched on to. It's like taking strands together and weaving them into a stronger and stronger cable so that you can really pull projects through the eye of the needle. And not in a short-term way, but in a 4, 5, or longer-term horizon, through teamwork. Sometimes you're starting off with people who hardly knew each other, let alone talk to each other. You have to build the team. You have to get them pulling together. That's what we're doing. And to finalize, we have this challenge ahead of us. We have to have also a discussion, an in-depth discussion about what happens in terms of sizing the things to the right scale. Our meeting today is the basis for further work, and the more in-depth, complex discussions can now take place to make the financial system fit for purpose for the new shift of paradigm.
I think we all know that in Latin America and the Caribbean, there are tremendous resources for renewable energy, tremendous natural resources, certainly far more than in Europe. And the data that we have about the levels of renewable energy in Latin America and in the Caribbean is slightly skewed because there are a lot of large hydro projects in the region. And those projects are less and less attractive as climate change makes droughts more frequent. However, we have abundant sunshine, we have abundant wind energy, many of our countries have geothermal potential. The challenge is not the availability of the resources or the business case for making those energy resources affordable. it's that initial money. And what we've been talking about here in terms of catalyzing investment, de-risking the initial investment and crowding in money is very critical to the process. And to have institutions such as these on board in that de-risking and in that catalyzing of additional private sector finance is very, very critical to that sort of green energy transition. And that's something that we discussed in great detail today. Obviously, it's going to vary country by country based on the resources, based on the state ownership of the energy and various legislative challenges. But I believe that there is a consensus and an understanding that the development banks can help to de-risk and help to catalyze the crowding in of additional resources. And I think that is the transformative key that's missing in the green energy transition in most of Latin America and the Caribbean.
Thank you very much. We have to leave it here. Muchas gracias. Damos por concluida la...
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Good evening.